Yeah, someone's gonna come after me now and be like, "Man, that podcast sucked," and I'll be like, "You know what? I'd have told me that when
It
someone
was the
says I
best
suck,
kind.
yeah, when someone says it sucks, I'm gonna make 50 more now."
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, so, Ida, my very first question for you is, how are you?
I am pretty good, I have to say.
Well, that's going to be the hardest question you're going to face tonight, I think. No, I want to
I'm
ask
pretty
you.
good.
Yeah, I want to ask you basically, because we're going to go all over the place in this interview. But where originally did you get the idea to start writing? Because for me, I watched Conan O'Brien and Saturday Night Live, and I'm like, dude, I want to do that. I want to be in broadcasting or comedy. So, what got you into writing?
I guess, well, my first book was my story. So I had always wanted to write my story,
Okay.
but it was never so strong as when I watched an episode actually of Land and Sea. And they talked about a bunch of people that live down on the Bjorn Peninsula, and they had been in a fire. I think it was around the same time as our house fire, and none of them were talking to each other. They were all like, Land and Sea made it sound like they were hermits, and that everybody kind of went their own way and they didn't really live a good life because of this fire that happened in Saskatchewan, but it happened to impact this community on the Bjorn Peninsula. So when I saw that, I was like, I can help them. I can write a book that's going to help them. It's going to help people. And I didn't realize at the time that I was really helping my own community because our own community hadn't survived it either. And I was kind of, after coming from a burn camp in Nova Scotia, and I had this in my head that, it was an epiphany and I was doing so wonderful. And, I was going to write about this. And then I did. And I couldn't believe the difference even writing it down made. Like it was amazing. So after my book came out, somebody did a review and they said, well, this is a one hit wonder. And I was like, frig you, I'm going to write more books. So I wrote 4 more.
It's interesting because it's funny because for people that are outside Newfoundland, they might understand like the land and sea. But it's like one of those shows that kind of focuses on basically. I like to call it like Newfoundland culture, Newfoundland stories. Like my mom and dad love watching it. I think they've got like DVDs upstairs, but we don't have a DVD player. So then they just
Yeah.
watch it when it comes on, and they love watching the stories. And I guess when you get, for me, when I get older and watch them, I get the kind of culture. When I was younger, I was like, man, this is boring. I don't want to watch
Yeah.
this. But when you get older, you're like, oh, it's
Oh, look
culture.
at,
It is
yeah.
culture.
Someone our age. Look at
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I worry when they do land and sea, and then someone's like, oh, I remembers going to see the wonderful grand band. I'd be like, all right, you're old. And then there's someone that will come on and be like, oh, I remembers going to see Rex Gowdy. I'm like, oh my God, I'm old.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Then it hit you.
yeah. I want to ask because talking about obviously the fire, I believe it was June 1980. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
like you've lost, I believe you got down. Let me make sure. Like you lost 5 siblings in that as well.
Yes. So I lost 4 brothers and a sister. So well, 3 of them were younger. My sister was younger and 2 boys were younger. And there was 2 older than me. And I was burned actually in that fire. So would have probably been number 6.
Okay. How old were you at this time?
I was 15.
Oh wow. I mean,
Yeah.
I know. Like again, you wrote about it in your book, and people, can go out and buy the book and read about it. But like at 15, you're losing family members. Like, how
Yeah.
did that make you? Like, how did you cope with that?
I think the hardest part about being burnt at 15 was being 15
Yeah.
because I mean, losing siblings was really difficult, but being burned at 15 even I think made it a little bit harder. And that I don't mean that to sound like selfish or anything else, but I think it's harder on a person when
Yeah.
they're that age for something like that to happen to them.
Because you're already going through so much at 15 anyway. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
like 15 is a
yeah.
hard time anyway. Like your hormones are kicking in and you're starting to notice boys, you're starting to notice yourself, and then all of a sudden, like all that's taken away. And I mean, I went from a family of 10, like there was 10 siblings in a big house going nuts all the time, and went home and there was only mom and dad, and like a different house was being built, and there was a plot of ground in the graveyard that was scraped clean, and like everything was just different. So I came from like within the matter of 2 months, like everything changed. I didn't have not one thing of my own from the past, right? So that was really difficult.
And like, I guess, like how many? I know it's gonna maybe sound like a little bit of a I guess bloated question here, or stupid question, but
That's okay.
you can't ask stupid questions. But
That's right.
like, how many of you are still left?
So there was five and five. So five lived and five died.
And
So
like, do you find at times, like, I guess now, obviously getting older, like you're obviously going to miss the other five, but do you find it at least somewhat comforting that you're not going through it by yourself? Like, you have other siblings here that went through the same process.
we did all go through the same process, but we all went through it by ourselves. So like
Okay.
when I wrote my book, like it was 27 years later,
Yeah.
and it was the first time that any of us actually ever talked about how the fire impacted us, because
Okay.
back then you didn't talk about anything like it was. And people even in the community, when I went to write the book, like I had to ask questions because of course I wasn't there, right? Like I was burned and I was just taken away,
Yeah.
so I wasn't there for any of it. And when I was asking questions, like people couldn't talk to me, my uncle couldn't talk, people just wouldn't talk. They were like, no, we couldn't talk about that because we were afraid we'd make somebody cry. And like you were told like don't you go bring that up. So because nobody was bringing it up, there was nobody talking about it. So then because nobody was talking about it, we didn't talk to each other about it. So basically the book kind of brought us all kind of a little bit back together, because we were all kind of siloed, like in our own little world, I guess, of hurt,
Yeah,
so it's
that's fair. I think it's interesting because I think in like the culture that we live in now, there's more people that like want to talk. Like, yes, obviously there's still people that says like no one's going to listen to that. Don't talk about it. But I
yeah.
feel like it's a little bit more open. Like, I know it's
Oh,
maybe, yeah, yeah.
150,000%.
Like,
Like
I know,
that
yeah,
morning, there was one young fella, he was my age, he was in my class, and he was there like throwing buckets of water on the fire. And his father said, like, you better go home, the bus will be down in a few minutes. And he had to go home, get dressed, get on the bus, and go over and write exams. Like in today's world, that would never happen.
no, there would be
Right,
like
there was a
there would
whole
be a
class
note.
of grade, yeah, like it was brutal. There was a whole class of grade 11s. My brother was in grade 11, and there was a whole class of grade 11s wrote their exams, and they didn't know if he was alive or dead. Like they were like he wasn't there, and they knew there was a fire, so they didn't know if he was alive or dead. Right, so I mean, like today there'd be all kinds of counselors running at the school, and it was just it was like nobody talked about it, and nobody did anything at the times. It
Yeah,
was,
because I
you know.
kind of look at it from the standpoint now. I know it's a different scenario, but like when I'm comparing it to almost like mental health, like back in the day, and it's kind of a two-way street for me because it's like I grew up in the 90s where it's like it wasn't really talked about, but I'm sure there's actors and actresses out there now that will gladly talk about it and say, listen, this was going on way before then. But now
Yes.
when you see so much of it being mental health and awareness of that, you're like, well, that's good. But on another side, you're kind of like, all right, like ease up a bit because I don't know if this is mental health that you're talking about or if it's just you're going through a situation that's tough. But as,
Yeah, and
as
like
yeah,
that's so true, because like people are so eager now to wear a label, because if you put
yeah,
it on Facebook like that you're depressed, everybody's, oh, you poor thing. But like that only lasts for so long, and then people are like, well, yeah, hurry up and get over it. Like we don't want to be hanging out with you. And like it makes it hard on the people that are really going through something,
yeah, because
not that.
they see
Yeah,
that and then they think, well, geez, that's a person that I could have confided in, but now I don't feel comfortable confiding in
yeah.
that person. Yeah.
And I'm really not knocking mental health
Oh,
off.
no, no.
I wouldn't, but there are people that, like, oh, for every little thing, it's mental health. No, it's
Yeah,
not. You're,
yeah.
you're having a bad day.
Yeah,
That's
it's
it, right?
I've come to realize that like there's points and places that you can kind of somewhat joke about. Like I like sometimes to say to people if they ask like, "Are you depressed?" or I'm like, "Listen, I'm depressed, but I don't think I'm like there's something mentally wrong there. It's just like I'm sad because this is the reason." I can say that.
Yeah.
There are times that I'll make a joke about my OCD. Not that I've diagnosed with OCD, but it's like I like things a certain way. But if someone ever came to me and said, "Listen, OCD is actually pretty severe," I'd be like, "You know what? You're right. I'm sorry, but this is just my way of making
Yes.
a
Yeah.
joke at it." But it's not making fun of them at any point,
No. No.
right? Like I've had people that would come up to me and years ago when I was at Carleton, and it just kind of they're words that just kind of float off your tongue. But I remember using uh it was like the R word, retard, and someone was
Yeah.
like, "Can you not use that around me?" I'm like, "You know what? I didn't mean it that way, but sure, around you
Yeah.
and in the future, I will try my best not to." Because it is some people take it the wrong way. It's like I take the word, not that I'm overly sensitive about it, but when people say disability, it's almost like, okay, when they put a light on of, well, he's disabled, he's not able to do anything. I'm like, no, no, no.
No.
That
No.
now
That's
you're
not
taking it.
true.
Now you're taking it the
Yeah.
wrong way.
Taking it to the limit.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, everyone has kind of, I guess, there's certain terms that people like that don't like, but you're in a world, like I said before we even did this interview, where you got to be very careful what you say, because
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, well, I've got a video of him saying that word. It's like, okay, how many times did he say it? Oh, just the once, but we can cancel him, right? It's like,
Yeah. Let's
yeah,
get rid of him.
yeah,
He used that word 500 years ago.
yeah, exactly. The other thing I want to talk about as well is, now when you were mentioning about getting the review and someone was saying kind of like it was a one-hit wonder, I like that actually, because were you more or less driven then to like driven to show that person like, listen, don't call me a one-hit wonder. I'm gonna keep on writing more books. Or was there something also when you wrote the first book, you're like, I actually like doing this, so let's keep doing this?
I think it was a little bit of both, but I don't think I had to, like, to me, I have, like, I don't believe I'm a writer still, right? Like, I write books, but if someone says you're an author, I'm like, yeah, okay, I am. So, like, I still don't believe it. Actually, there's times I'll be like, no, like, that's not me. That's not me. Um, but yeah, I think I always liked writing. Like, even in high school, I'd write poems, and I'd be writing little short stories, and I'd write entries to send to the Herald. When you were 14 and 15, you wanted to see yourself in the Herald and things like that. So uh, I think I was always a writer. And when I had the courage to write my own book, I was kind of a little bit full of myself then when I was writing that, because I was like, oh, I'm healed, I'm healed, I'm
Yeah.
healed. And then at the launch day, I was like, I am not healed. um, so I'm very competitive too. Like I have a competitive streak. Don't ever tell me I can't do something. Like if someone said you can't be the prime minister, and I had even a little tiny bit of an inkling that I could, like, look
Yeah.
out, because I
Yeah.
will be.
I like that though, the answer there of more or less like being driven, because I feel like when it's almost counterproductive, because when someone says you can't do it, it's almost like you would think that it's supposed to deflate you, but then it doesn't. But then like but then like when someone says you can absolutely do that, you're like, no, I can't. And then it's like the opposite, where it's like, well, they think I can, so no, I'm not going to.
Yeah. Or then you have to do it like super, haloed, because they expect you to do it. But when they don't expect you, then like, and you surprise them, it's like, oh, she could do it.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting with your remark there was when you were saying that when you were writing it, and then the day that was published, you were like, oh, like you thought you were healed, but you're not healed. In that, I've read, and people have told me, like when you feel like a bit of anger or rage, whatever, like, start writing and then pretend that you're going to mail it to someone, because that takes pretty much all the level out, rather than in the world we live in now where you can still like send a text message instantly. Like you have to spend time writing.
Yes.
Did you find like during that writing process that there was some healing or something, like it was getting it off your chest?
Well, I can tell you that from June 19th, 1980 until September the 7th, 2014, every single day, if I could pick out any second of that fire, like any second. You could say, well, what happened 10 seconds in, I could tell you. But now that, like, after I published a book, sometimes I have to go back to the book to see, right? So like 40, almost 40 years of it, and I could, like after I wrote it down, now I'll be like, oh yeah, that happened, and I have to go back to the book actually. And so I mean, yes, if you write things down, there is a healing in writing.
Yeah, because I feel like especially over time, like I mean, I've graduated university maybe I want to say 4 or 5 years, but like you'll hear stories of like remember that night when we did this or remember that, and like sure, from a year when you left to 2 years when you left, you're probably like, oh, it's still vivid, but over time whether like you make up stuff to make it sound better or you make up stuff that you're like, hey, that this is
You
how I
think
remember
happened.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think
And then
happened.
someone has to like be the in between where it's like, actually, this is what happened. You're like, oh, okay, not as bad as what I thought, but that's not how I remembered it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like books are great in that aspect. Now, besides this book, I you've have written other books like Being Mary Rue,
Mary Rowe. Yeah.
Mary Rowe, sorry,
Yeah.
the Promise, the Liars, the Stolen Ones, which is the
It's
most
brand
recent
new.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I like that you said that you don't think yourself as an author, but when you get accomplishments like winning I think it was like a silver medal for the last three, how do you like really take that? Because it's basically someone gratifying you with saying, "This is good. Like we're
Well,
reading it." Yeah,
when I received it, first I got an email saying that I was the winner, and so I sent a message to somebody who's a publisher, and I was like, "Is this a real thing? Like, did I read? Like, is this a real award, or is it something that you kind of buy? So like you pay for an award?" And he came back and he said, "No," he said, "like that is a big thing." I'm like, "Oh my god! Well, I want a big thing."
yeah.
So it was kind of surreal, but still, I don't know. Like, I guess you'll always second guess yourself no matter what you do.
Yeah, I guess there's like kind of like a little bit of a humbling experience to it. Like, when you win an award and you're kind of grateful for it because in terms of to compare it maybe to an author to a podcast, like if someone came across my podcast tomorrow and said, like, oh, this is like a great Newfoundland podcast, there's a part of me that's like, well, that's nice. It's like it's nice to be noticed, but I don't really see myself as a podcaster as much as
Yeah.
more of, and I think, kind of
Yeah.
relating it to any Newfoundlander, it's just the storytelling. It's just having a conversation with people. You do it in the form of books, I do it in the form of interviews.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but do you think it's kind of, I guess it's a little bit of a loaded question, but do you think it's kind of an easier aspect being a Newfoundlander where I know that you kind of mentioned the bio that it was your father and grandfather's like storytelling aspect that kind of got you a little bit into writing as well. But do you think just being a Newfoundlander in that sense kind of helps as well? Because we're
Yeah.
really good storytellers.
Yeah. For sure. But like the art of storytelling and writing is two completely different things, right? Like it is actually two separate, I guess, identities that you have. You are a writer, but you're also a storyteller. If you were in the storytelling circle, that's what you'd think. But like from being able to tell a story, I guess I do it through my writing.
Yeah.
So like there is technically a difference. Like if I went looking for a grant for storytelling, I'd be told like you're not a storyteller, you're a writer. So
Yeah.
like go away.
Yeah. It's interesting because like when you actually break it down, like I feel like a storyteller is someone that you can go to them, like whether it's in a store or around a campfire, and they'll give you a very vivid story just by
Yeah.
speaking. But when you write it down in a book, it's almost like you want to create the imagery, but in a different way.
Yes.
Like you want it to be written that people can see it and get it over time. Where a storyteller is more or less like wanting you in the moment to
Yeah.
get like understand that this is what happened. But in a book, you're trying to paint a kind of like paint a picture.
Mhm. Yep. For sure.
I want to ask you now because I actually do see some of the books that are displayed in the background there.
Oh.
Well, yeah, yeah. I want to ask, like, what made you change into, I guess, doing more novel-based books?
I think it was my grandmother. If I could like really pinpoint the place, I was always in awe of my grandmother. Like she didn't leave North Harbour for very long. Like she left for a little bit, but she lived her life, a happy life in North Harbour. And like if anybody looked at her, they'd say, "Well, you must have had a good life," but how would you know?
Yeah,
Like when we look at the amenities we have today, like we had, if we were all destitute now and put back in 1900, I don't know that very many of us will be able to live.
yeah,
Like I don't know. No, seriously, I don't think we'd be able to survive, right? So like just the matter of being able to survive. And if you looked at um like all the books that are written from the 1800s, like even back in them times, they were written about men and like what men could do, and men going to war, and men doing this, and men in politics. But there was nothing really about the women that were behind them. So I was more interested from my grandmother's perspective in what she would do if she was behind somebody.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I kind of laugh at it because it's like when you look at like the generational gap between people, like within the last few weeks, could have been the last few days. It was like when Facebook went down, and like I'm sure it's going to happen again with Facebook, Instagram. And I was just sitting there, and I remember if we were younger, and MSN didn't work, I was like, all right, like I'm just going to go down to my buddy's house and see what he was doing rather than message him. But like now it's almost like you get so accustomed to it where you're like, so these
The
things are down.
social, yeah,
Yeah, it's
social
like
media
so.
is so
Yeah,
unsociable, right?
yeah. So it's like these things are down. How am I supposed to connect with people? But there's a whole age group that don't know about knocking on someone's door and going to see
Yeah.
what they're doing. And then they were like, "Oh my god, I've just lost everything." I'm just like, "Yeah, your friend only lives like 3 houses down." It's like,
But you couldn't even
no,
tell that. You
yeah,
couldn't even say that to anybody. Oh my God, I've lost everything, because who were you going to tell? Because
yeah,
there's no media to tell it.
yeah,
You were singing out to the
yeah.
ceiling. Oh, I lost
Yeah. Well,
everything.
the ironic thing is when it came back, a lot of people posted more or less
I
like, wasn't it not?
survived the
Yeah,
blackout.
yeah, or like, wasn't it nice to like be off
Yeah,
Facebook and all that for a few hours? I'm like, you can do that anytime. It's
yeah.
sad that it actually
It's
like
sad that
yeah,
you're forced. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like they should do that more often, where it's like, oh, sorry, Facebook is
Time
down.
out. Time out.
It's like go spend time with your family. So they're like, I guess if you tell me to, I have to.
And
Um,
even like in the house, if you turned off Wi-Fi, it still don't help because you can get it on your phone.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like the kids today now have data, and
Yeah,
it's like
data plans.
when we didn't. It's like if your PlayStation 2 didn't work because I don't know, just say Wi. Well, we don't have Wi-Fi, but
Your
electronics or
plug it.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like, all right, that's enough for that today. It's like, what's my neighbor doing? All right, let's go out and build a
yeah. Go
snowman or
out,
something.
yeah, go out and play hockey out in the
Yeah, yeah,
street or something, right?
exactly. I
But
want to ask. Yeah,
imagine
go ahead.
today though, like if you were told that there was, oh, there's no craft dinner, you know, you have to go get potatoes, but you have to plant them first, and so like how many people really would survive?
Oh, between you and me, it's like if it's not a pizza pocket or a pizza or chicken nuggets or something, I'm pretty much gone. But I'm okay with that. I'll be like, listen, you got the week of the herd already on the way. I want to ask now with the newest one, the stolen ones. Give me a little bit more, I guess, for me and anyone who's listening, like a little bit more in detail about that book, how it came to be, and how you found the reception so far.
Okay, well, it's only out like 7 or 8 weeks, so it's pretty new.
Yeah.
But
So
when I
people are
wrote,
basically loving it already. No.
yes, oh, absolutely. But when I wrote Being Mary Rowe was my first one, and I had no intentions of writing another one. And then everybody was like, "Oh my God, they felt like my mother,
Yeah.
it felt like my grandmother. Like, please tell me more." So I was like, "Okay, I'll write
No.
another one."
Be honest, Ida. What actually happened is that reviewer came back and said two-hit wonder, and then you said
No,
no.
she's not reviewing no more. So then I wrote the second one, which was The Promise. And like somebody reviewed Meeting Mary Rowe, and they said, well, it's all nice if it's all wrapped up, if you like something all wrapped up in a bow. And I was like, well, Shaggy, now I'm not going to wrap this one up in a bow. So this one I left on a cliffhanger. And like I had people meet me on the trail. I was out for a walk on the trail, and this woman said, I was reading that book and I can't stand what you did with that girl. I was like, what did I do? I said, you'll have to read the next one. So then I had The Liars, which was the follow up to The Promise. And then I kind of thought it was finished, but in the beginning, the first book, Mary and Peter didn't have a story. So that their stories in the stolen ones. But then I wasn't sure how I was going to present it. So I started actually like it's written as if it was this year, like this summer, and
Okay.
two people came home because they were DNA linked to Mary and Peter from Being Mary Rowe. And they read journals to try to figure out how they are related to Mary and Peter. So the story is told so that Mary and Peter get their stories, but they get it through this journal. And then you also get a look at like COVID-19, like the girl in the story, her mom dies from COVID, and they're still like trying to get over that. And so there's a lot of if it's accurate in the past, it has to be accurate in the present. So, and now I wrote it in December, hoping that you could really gather in July or August, and we could kind of. So um, it makes sense, like that it matches sort of today.
Now, like, are these based on actual like not that you're gonna actually give them the names of these people, but is it based on more or less fiction, or kind of like you're creating it as it goes, like you're kind of creating the whole atmosphere, or are they based on experiences that you've had?
Well, some of them are experiences, but a lot of it is on history itself.
Okay.
Like, say, for example, in the stolen ones, Mary and Peter, who are like in their journal, they go to Fox Harbour in 1900. And in 1900, two children disappeared in Fox Harbour, were never seen or heard tell of again. Like their
Okay.
parents went to their grave without knowing what happened to their two children. They went off to get rabbits in the woods and didn't come back. And 40 years later, somebody confessed to the murder, but the mom and dad were gone then. So
Yeah.
I bring that into the story. Like Mary and Peter go to, Fox Harbour to deliver her baby, and the two children are gone, and they're out looking for the children. So I always try to to make sure that I put like historical truths, I guess as truth as you can get it, in the
Yeah.
story. And like another example was a man from Point Leamington was buried alive in the war, like in World War One. And his thumb moved, and someone saw it while they were burying him, and they pulled him out of the grave. So, like, I incorporate that story into this book too. So, like, all the books have real, real facts from Newfoundland in them. It's
I
just
mean,
the characters are
yeah.
not real.
I mean, it sounds like a great, kind of a great book for Halloween. Like, I want to ask too, like, in writing all these, well, in the last three novels and your own kind of story, like, what kind of things excite you about writing? Because, like, sometimes you hear people get writer's block or they get stuck. Like, have you ever experienced that, and how do you get past that?
I don't know if I had writer's block during, like, the pandemic was a perfect time to write. Like,
Yeah,
I could have churned out 10 books because what else were you going to? You were sitting home. But I didn't want to write. Like, I didn't want that to be part of my history, that I wrote books during the pandemic sort of thing.
yeah,
And so it wasn't that I had writer's block. I just didn't want to write. And I don't think that that's block. It's just didn't want to write.
yeah. It's better
But
to write.
then,
It's better to write nothing than write like something that's really not something that like you're focused on, basically.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
already had to start at the stolen ones. Like I had it like started in probably 20,000 words in it, and I'd pick it up and I'd say no, I'm not going to add it. And then I'd pick it up and I'd say no, I'm not going to add it, because I wanted to enjoy the writing experience, and I wasn't enjoying like not being forced to be home, but I wasn't enjoying the solitude.
Yeah.
Like in a writing way sort of thing. But
Yeah.
then Christmas came and I was like, okay, I promised everybody I'd have another book out next year, so I better get at it. So like this was Christmas.
That's when they are actually forcing you to stay home. That's when you
Yeah.
see. That's when you see your neighbors and people reading the other
Yeah.
books and saying, "What are you doing out shopping? Get back in and write that book."
Well, my husband was working too, so he was working like Christmas Day and everything. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to do something. So I sat down and it was just like it came to me. And I wrote feverishly for 7 or 8 days and I had the book. Like it was just like an epiphany, and I had the book.
How long? Like now in 7 or 8 days? Like, is that how long it takes you to write a whole book, or is that like how long
Oh,
it takes just to? Because I was going to say like
about
that.
a year. It takes about
Yeah.
a year. But like
Yeah.
if I had the research done. So in fairness, like I had already taken a long time, but like the 50,000 words that I needed came in actually like 7 or 8 days. So,
Okay.
but like in order for me, I like to do research. So a friend of mine sends me like a thing, and she'll say, "Are you interested in this?" And I'll look at it and I'll say, "Yeah, I might be able to work that in." And but then I has to go like really look. So like in the lawyers, which like I am so proud of that this happened last year. In the lawyers, I found from writing The Promise this story about this Ezra, who was the Ephraim, his real name was. He was an Eskimo in Labrador, and he was referred to as Ephraim the Eskimo. And it was written about in these Moravian journals. And he killed his first wife, and then he married this other lady, and he killed her son so he could marry or go with the daughter. And like this was real life. And the first girl, like she was never mentioned again until I found his journal, a journal entry that he admitted to killing her, like when he was dying in jail. So he died of tuberculosis, like in 1900 or something. But she was forgotten about. So I got her name added to the missing and murdered list.
Okay.
So like, and she's her name is spoken aloud now. And I gave her the first chapter in The Liars, like as a kind of a tribute to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
was really proud of that, right? Like I found
yeah.
her and she was forgotten about. So it was good. It was a good thing.
Yeah, like now it seemed like you like the whole kind of history buff or like the history
I
side of
love
things.
I
Like, yeah,
love
because I was gonna say like it feels like I have a brother that like loves watching unsolved mysteries to the point where it's like I know what the theme song is before I enter a room. Like I'm more or less into the comedy side of things, but like each person has their interest. So I'm kind of wondering like based on, and feel free to like stop me or say it's not correct, but like based on your obviously story about the fire, like did that kind of lead you into like the path of how you do your novels? Because like there is sort of a mystery where people weren't telling you the whole story, and then now you're kind of like piecing it together, so now that your novels are kind of somewhat like that.
I don't think so, but now when I wrote Being Mary Rowe, I remember the guy that goes out, like when we go out selling books from the publisher,
Yeah,
he says to me, he said, "You're like Mary Rowe," and I was like, "Why?" He said, "You're
that's
just like her."
that's when you
So
took a person, smacked him on the face.
so he said like the women characters are strong women. Like my mom was strong, and I guess I had to be strong, and my grandmother was strong. So like he said that's where you're getting your characters, like, and it's mostly women characters in there, like in each of the books. So he was like, that's where you get to. He said, "You're
Yeah,
Mary Rowe."
yeah. I feel like in my family, so like my, so I know my nan was a very kind of strong woman. Lost her husband, I think, relatively well when my mom was relatively young. Now
Yes.
she impasses that too, but it's like I remember when you were smaller and you wouldn't get away with anything in the house because it was just more or less like down your throat. And still to this day, you're 30 years old and she's still down there going like, no, no. And I'm just still like, all right, you gotta give it up at some point. And it's like, no, son. And it's funny because there are obviously the flaws that you like about people. Like I get sometimes when people say, Jesus, he's some strong witted or he got some strong head on him. And I'm just like, good. And then there's other people like, I want that on my team. And I'm like, good. So it comes in like different packages. But I want to ask you now with the stolen ones, like that's relatively new. So I feel like give it some time to breathe there, Brian. But do you see yourself doing a follow up like in 2022? Because it seems like every year you have a new book at least out.
Well, I have actually two more books in the hopper. So,
Oh, there you
but
go.
one of them is my mom's story. So I'm halfway through that. But like when I'm writing my characters, so I like to be like when I was writing Being Mary Rowe, I was Mary. When I was writing The Promise, I was Aerith, and when I was writing the stolen ones, I was either Peter at sometimes, or else I was Darlene at others. So, like it depend, but I can't for the life of me get into my mom's head. Like I don't want to be there. So I mean, she lost five kids, right? And like
Yeah.
she had a hard life. So I don't want. I can't. I can't get in there. Like, and I find it really really hard. And then I did this other course, just like a writing course, and we had to do assignments. So I was like, all right, I'll throw something together like for the first night, and then after 10 nights, here I had like a half a book. So, but it's more like on a spooky fiction.
Yeah.
It's not on any kind of a like historical thing. It's called speculative fiction, which is kind of just like not real life, but a little bit on the other side of the realm. So I'm going to do that one too, but I don't know if I'm going to be either Linehan Young on that. I might be just IF Young or something. I don't like because I want to
Okay.
write more historical fiction and memoir. And I don't
Yeah.
want to kind of associate one with the other, because people might say, "Oh, like she's gone off her head now. I'm not going reading her anymore."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like I've never thought of it that way, but I guess with any aspect, it's like, I was never really big into Harry Potter books, but just say I knew a lot of people that were. So like, I think it's like J.K. Rowling does it, but like,
Yeah.
if you just randomly one day came across just like it wasn't J.K. Rowling, it was maybe like, she actually used her first name and R at the end. Like people don't go into the history of it; they'll just be like, "Oh, like a new author, like that's cool." And then years later, after you like both books, you're like, I don't like these books anymore because she differed them. I'm just like, no, shut up. You liked both of them. Stop it. Now you're just being picky. So I get why people do it. It's like if I wanted to do this podcast to interview guests and I wanted to do like a 90s based podcast and called it Tobin Does 90s, people would be like, yeah, he's doing the same thing. But if you went completely different,
Yeah.
then people would be like, I like this guy. He's a cool host. It's like, he's the same guy. No, now I don't like it anymore. It's like,
Yeah, no,
right.
and like I don't want people, like I know people, I have a lot of followers, which I'm grateful for, and they like the historical fiction
Yeah.
part. So I wouldn't want them to go pick up a book belonged to me, and not intend, like if they had to know it was a different genre.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
be open about it,
Yeah.
but like if they don't want that genre, then they don't have to, like stay away
It's
from it.
yeah, like it's almost like they see the name, they associate it with a genre, they get home
They're
and
going
read
like,
it.
"Oh my God,
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
story about Mary Rowe. I'm going to
Yeah,
get that."
and then when
And
they
then they're
read it,
like,
they're like,
"Holy moly, what the hell happened to her?"
yeah, no, that's fair. I want to like to kind of clue up the interview here because we're close to the ending there now. But
Yeah.
like, what do you see in mind for, I guess, the future? Because you said earlier you don't consider yourself so much an author, but like you do enjoy writing books. So
I
like,
love writing.
like
I love writing.
so obviously I guess you're going to keep on writing books, but like what do you see, like what's your goal more or less in the future for this? Because I know when you get publishers to publish it, after a while they're going to come and be like, well, she's doing really good in these books, like they're going to probably start forcing you to write more. But like what's your goal at the end of the day for all of it?
Well, I got a place name now called Juniper Tickle, and I got some characters that I don't know if I'm going to like start looking up more historical Newfoundland facts, or just like make it kind of historical without the facts.
Yeah.
And just do maybe 3 or 4 books in another series, just not as complex maybe as this one, because this one started out not as a series, and it's some hard to try to piece together everything, like and intertwine everything and remember where everybody was. Like I had sheets of paper everywhere saying she was there on this timeline, she was there on this time. So like you got to be careful, right? Because people know. So I'm next time I'm going to start off with a series, and actually like platinum. Matthew Ledrew will say, "Oh, she's going platinum," but
Yeah.
I'll have like an idea of what I'm going to do for each of the books.
Oh, that's fair. Now, I guess the kind of a follow up to that, like I know earlier we were saying about like the influence for writing and all this came to be, but like, are there certain, I guess, authors or books that you'll read over and over again? Because like, listen, I'm not really a book person. I'm more of like a podcast person or listening. Like
Mm-hmm.
I listen to audio stuff all the time.
4 of my books are in audio.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that. So I mean, like for someone like me, that's good because it's more like you're keeping up with trends, which is good as well. I've got parents upstairs. You try to play an audiobook for them, they'll tell you to shut up. But
I wouldn't have
yeah,
listened to one like 2 years ago. No way.
yeah,
But then I was driving. My daughter lives in Botwood, and I drives to Botwood and I listens
yeah,
to a book. And I
yeah,
almost don't want to visit them because I almost want to come back and
yeah.
listen to the rest.
Yeah, just be like, I drove out here and
Just
the book's
listen.
finished. Yeah, just to listen to the book. And then they're like, I'm gonna go by because I want to
I got
listen
3
to
more
this.
chapters.
Yeah. But I want to ask you, like, are there any ones, like any authors out there now that you're kind of like interested in, or even just taking stuff that ripping off, obviously, but like getting inspired by?
I just like to read historical fiction, but there's not a lot that
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I try actually to stay away from books for that reason, because
Yeah.
I don't want to be not blamed, but I don't want
Yeah.
to be influenced by somebody else's stories.
Yeah.
Like I want my stories to be my own.
That's fair.
And that's why I purposely stay away from reading, actually.
I feel the same way when someone says, what's your like favorite podcasters? I feel like a little bit of an ass when they're like, wait, you don't listen to other people's podcasts? I'm like, well, not like exclusively. Like if it's a good episode, I'll listen to it. But
Yeah.
they're like, well, how are you supposed to get better? I'm like, well, if anything, they'll never accuse me of ripping them off because I don't know what they're doing.
That's right. And that's the way I am. I don't want to like be influenced by somebody else's
Yeah.
stuff.
One minute your story goes in a whole different direction. They're like, that sounds a lot like this novel. Did you read that? You're like, oh yes, I loved it. I couldn't put it down. Actually, you know what? You're right.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening and good night.